kind of my spiel. It's almost 10:05. We've got 21 out of the 21 people. Oh yeah, it's the Google the assets. So select in that Camtasia training page. Right under the leave feedback, there's a few things you might need. The free trial takes you to the download. Secondly, to follow along with the same assets, it's that portion of this. It should be publicly linked, and they're all free assets as well. Oh, and one thing that I did drop in here as well is the info about these assets, which is hopefully handy to you. As an instructional designer, you're going to need assets from lots of places, and the freer the better, right? For video assets, all of these came from Pexels. This particular audio asset came from just the YouTube audio library, which has a lot of really good resources. Camtasia also offers a handful of free assets. And so for me, I grab all the free assets I can. So if I skim over my library and you see oh my God, Alex has 6,000 assets, I spent a day just going through and downloading as many assets as I could. And these icons are actually from a place called Icon Monster, which I've recently discovered through someone else, but it's so cool. I highly recommend going and checking that out because I'm a big fan of blending iconography into my videos. I think it's a really good way to illustrate points when you just can't find that image or that stock video that really pops. Just a nice pop-on icon really does some wonders. All right, and with that said, I think we've waited long enough. Let's get rolling. I'm going to move this off that screen. A couple of housekeeping things just as I'm getting started. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Hopefully, other people can help me answer questions. I am going to keep my participants list open, so if you want to use that hand-raising feature, I'll keep an eye out for that. Just be conscious, too, that some questions can be saved for the end, so if you feel like your question doesn't need to be answered right away, feel free to write it down. That'd be very cool of you, just because I'm going to talk at you for about an hour. If it does need to be addressed immediately, or if I'm doing something glaringly terrible or you need something right away, feel free to raise that hand. I highly encourage you not to just unmute and start going because there's 20 plus people here with more joining every minute. And that's about it. So let's dive right into it. This is Camtasia. If you've downloaded Camtasia already, this is what it looks like for you. It's got this sort of grayish color with this green sort of subsequent color scheme going on here. If you've downloaded or if you've purchased Camtasia, you've probably paid about $250 for it, unless you have a .edu address, which then drops your price to $160, $170. And if you've got the free trial right now, that's totally fine. The only difference in functionality between the free trial and the fully bought version is when you go to export a video, there's going to be a watermark on it. Other than that, you have all the bells and whistles that a paid Camtasia user would have, but you're watermarked and you can only play with it for 30 days or something. Now, the first thing I want to jump into about Camtasia is why would we use Camtasia? There are other suites of video products out there. The one that we all know and love very well in terms of suites of software is Adobe. So why would I use Camtasia, not Adobe Premiere? Adobe Premiere has its place. Adobe is amazing, but it's overwhelming. People use Adobe Premiere and After Effects to create feature-length films and such. As instructional designers or teachers, there are K-12 teachers here. I used to be a K-12 teacher myself. We don't need all of that. Camtasia is really good in the sense that it accomplishes the goal. It renders 1080p video. It renders 4K video, which is how big or how resolute your video is, without having to search for functions that are really important. So oftentimes we have to blur things out. We have to zoom and pan. We have to make highlights. We have to call attention because we're teaching people how to do things. To do that in Adobe Premiere, there's kind of a steep learning curve. With Camtasia, it's designed for educators. It's designed for instructional designers. So it's real quick and easy to get yourself up and running. Most ID listings too, if you've been slinking around the LinkedIn job boards, have Camtasia in there somewhere. You've got a couple of staples. You've got, Addy, Sam, Storyline, Rise. Camtasia is almost always embedded in there somewhere. So if you can tell an employer, throw something on your portfolio that you use Camtasia, if you're going for instructional design jobs, Camtasia is a big bonus because I've seen that there's a big trend moving towards video-based learning. Like, I know that e-learning is still king, and asynchronous, self-paced, non-video learning will always have a spot, but video-based learning is big. And, just a little background around myself. I used to be a K-12 teacher. I used to teach 7th grade English, and I would develop videos for my students. And Camtasia allowed me to get through and develop things for my kids right away. Now that I work as a higher ed ID, I develop videos for my faculty all the time. Hey, how do I do this? How do I do this thing? How do I use Canvas to do this? Oh no, Blackboard's going away. How do I export my course? Just open up Camtasia, do a quick video with some narration with my $50 microphone here, and I threw $50 out because that's a low price point for a microphone that will really up your audio game. Camtasia is great for this stuff. All right, with that being said, let's jump in. So this is Camtasia. We're going to take a quick tour around the screen, but the first thing that I want you to do, always, 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 is check your project settings. And you do that up here. Up at the very top, I've got a series of buttons. I've got my mouse, my hand, my cropper, which we'll talk about later. But then I also have a little drop-down menu, and you should have some sort of percentage in here. If I click that, and I can check, I can see what my video looks like from a bird's eye view, from up close. If I cycle through these numbers, I can sort of zoom in and out, around my staging area. I don't use that too often. I can detach the canvas itself and move it around the screen, which is very handy if I have a dual monitor setup. But what I really want everyone to know, first and foremost, is project settings. This is what I do at the very beginning of every single project. I want to know how big my video is supposed to be. Very often what I'll do is I'll start in 1080 and stay in 1080. And if I need a smaller video, I can worry about that down the line. I can always downsample, but upsampling is not a thing. So if I accidentally come in at 720 and the person on the other end of the line needs a 1080p video, I can't go back up. So 1080p is where I start. There's a lot of great presets here. So if I'm doing an Instagram video or a Facebook cover video or an iPhone thing, I can go custom if I want to. That's all great. However, 1080p is kind of king at the moment. 4K is still relatively new. It's also very big. So unless you have a lot of space on your hard drive to spare, I'd stay away from that. Camtasia does export in 480p if you force it to. I just don't often see it. For example, I did a project recently where I edited all of my videos in 1080p, uploaded it, sent it off to the client, but then the client came back with, hey, these videos are too large. Can we squish them down to 720? No problem. We can export at 720. However, if I started at 480 or 720 and they came back and went, hey, can we get these at 1080? We'd have to stretch it. It would look blurry. It would look grainy. So let's not do that. So always start in 1080 and always make that the first thing you do. Color just means the color of your canvas. I often opt for black because whenever I do fades, I often fade to black and then fade back in. However, you can make this any color you want. Just be aware that that is the permanent background color unless you add in like new shapes and such as your background. Frame rate is generally 30 frames per second. You have other options here as well, but 30 frames is sort of the standard. 25 FPS is sort of that film look. 60 frames per second is if you want like really smooth cutting video. However, it's useless unless your stock video comes in at 60 frames per second. So generally, I don't have much use for anything other than 30. And last but not least, auto-normalize loudness. I always recommend leaving this checked, just because sometimes you'll bring in assets that will be of varying loudness. If you check auto-normalize loudness, Camtasia will do its very best to try and bring loud audio down or bring quiet audio up to make a consistent listening experience for your end client. And those are the project settings. These are the ones that are on for me by default. So I just always come in, check real quick, and then go away. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring in all of my assets. I've got a music file here. I've got a bunch of icons and a few video files. I can do it one of two ways. I can press the import media button and it will prompt me to go look through my computer, or I can just get my assets in my folder, select them, and then dump them into what's called the media bin. I'm going to do that. I've got 14 assets here, and I'm just going to drag and drop, and here they are. And you can view your media bin, you can search your media bin in a variety of ways. I kind of like it like this, where it's sorted by type. If you are cool with just one long list by name, that's cool. By duration, by size, by dimension, by date added, that's fine too. I just like by type, just so I know what I'm working with. And the next thing that I want to address too is, like, let's say I drop, so I'm sorry, I'm kind of all over the place. Media bin has all my files. That's where it lives. This is my ingredients bucket. Now, once I actually need to start working, the next place that I need to be very aware of is this long horizontal strip down here. This is called the timeline. And if you've ever worked with a video editor, and if you ever work with a different video editor, every video editor will have a timeline, because videos, like human perception of time, have to be viewed linearly. And so the timeline is the start to finish of the elements of your video. And you may notice that I've got a couple of tracks here, or layers, if you will. But one big and important thing that I would be remiss if I didn't tell you right away is, first, you can just drop anything on the timeline that's visual or audible. So in this case, I'll start with video 1. I'll just drag it down. And notice I've got a little block there. And I can place this wherever I need it to. So we'll start here. The very beginning is 0. I've dropped it somewhere in the midst of things, and I can rearrange these blocks however I want to just by dragging them. So if I want my video to start with video 1, I just take this little block and slide it to the beginning. And notice that even though my playhead, which is what I'm going to refer to this thing from now on, is at 0, I can see that this is the very first frame. Now, the thing that I really want to stress, once I drop a video on the timeline, even though we checked our project settings already, my project will conform to the video that I've dropped on the timeline. So I'm going to go back into project settings just to double check. Cool. This is a 1080p video, which is great. However, if my very first element was a 720 video, like if I dropped a video that was too small or had like a weird shape like a square, my project would then shrink or morph to shape that video. So this 1080p may have switched over to 720. So I always drop in a video and then come back and double check my settings, change it back to 1080, and this is the only time you have to do that. Every video that you drop in from now on will be in the format that you want. So this is the timeline, and we've kind of touched on this already. It's linear, it's left to right. There's a set of numbers here that's kind of important to be aware of as well. As I scrub through this timeline, and you can scrub through your own, you'll notice that that number starts to increase. I'm at 8, 9, 10, 11. This clip is 16, 17 seconds long. And we have a set of numbers here. That very first number all the way on the left is hours. Camtasia can go into hours. I just don't recommend it. Then minutes, then seconds, and then the very last number there, you may notice doesn't go all the way to 60 or 100 because it's not milliseconds, it's actually frames. And so we set our frames in our project settings, and we're 30 frames per second. So as I get closer to the end of 13, so I'm at 13, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and then at that 30th frame, we start on our 14th second. So it's important to know that your frames do matter in terms of how your time gets added and accumulated. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is we can add as much content to this timeline as we want. But we do have to be conscious that things do exist above and below everything else. If you've ever worked in like a PowerPoint slide deck, you kind of know this concept already, that there are layers and you have to send things behind or on top of other things. The same works for video as well. So I'll just drop in college. You know, I didn't plan what I'm dropping in advance. I'm just dropping things in. I'll slide this to the beginning as well. And so notice too that track 2 is above track 1, and college icon is above college students or video 1. However, if I do move these things around, which I can, I just simply drag one of these above the other. Once I let go, that college icon is gone. And if we notice, you know, this video element is above this icon element, which is hiding it. The metaphor that I like to use is, think about it like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but you're looking at it from the top down. You've got a bottom slice of bread, you got a layer of peanut butter, a layer of jelly, and one top layer of bread. Even though I'm looking at it from the top down, I can see that layer of bread. I know that other stuff is there. It hasn't gone away. I just can't see it. So you do have to arrange your stuff vertically as well as left and right to get the most out of what you're trying to do. So I'm just going to move video 1 down back to track 1 so I can make some room for that icon because I want that to be right above. Another cool thing too about these tracks is these tracks can be named. So if you need some sort of organizational structure, I highly recommend naming your tracks. Track 1, track 2, track 3 doesn't really give me a lot of information or data. So what I'll do is I will call track 1 my video track, or just call it video. And all I did to do that was double click it. So on track 2, I'll do the same thing. Let my computer catch up because it's thinking apparently. There we go. Double click track 2. I'm going to call this images, because we can have videos and images on our timeline. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then the very last thing, let's do track 3. I'm going to call this music. Now the cool thing about music is it's not visual, so you can put it wherever you want. So I'm just going to do blurry vision. I'm going to drag this down to my timeline on track 3. And I can drag some more video elements down. Why not? Let's drag all of our stuff. Well, let's drag some of our stuff in. I'm going to drag video 2, video 3. Yeah, why not? Let's do 4 and 5. We've got way more music than actual video. Oh, here's an interesting thing, and I'll answer that question in the chat in just a second. You added a high frame rate video to your project. Do you want to change the editing rate to 60 frames per second? So if you are working with 60 frames per second, Camtasia will bump you and ask you like if you want to change it. For me, I'm just going to keep it at 30, and then Camtasia will automatically sample that 60 frame per second video to 30 frames per second, which is kind of nice. I never put on remember my selection just because I like being asked every time, just in case I want to change it. So I'm just going to continue and leave it as is. The question came up, how many tracks can you have? Theoretically, an infinite number. But that infinite number will be squeezed down by how beefy or robust your computer is. And the same thing with time. How long can we make our video? Our video can technically be infinite. However, be aware that Camtasia starts to bug out once your videos get really long and complicated. So if you have like really long video projects, I highly recommend breaking them up into multiple projects. Going back to the 60 frames per second video, when would you want a 60 frames per second video? Really, it just kind of depends on your end user. 60 frames per second is really smooth and nice. Let me see if I can just pop this open in my VLC media player. You may not see this super well just because it's going over Zoom, but you know, the frame rate's really high, it's really smooth, it doesn't have any sort of like noticeable lag in the video. So if your client needs a really high, crisp, clean quality video, 60 frames per second might be the way to go. However, 90% of the time, 30 frames per second is just kind of the standard, mainly because the human eye in like real life, if we had to equate real life imagery being processed by our brains, we see in like 30 frames per second. So the 60 frames per second thing is almost sort of an illusion, but it's a very nice looking illusion. All right, so we've got our videos in. Let's go ahead and play this just to kind of see. And if you're following along at home, you may have your own, but this is what I've got going on. I've got college students, music's coming in. I won't play the whole thing, but just to kind of see what's going on. This already looks kind of cool, you know, like we didn't do much, we're just arranging things. Not bad so far, we're doing okay. So, just a couple of other things too. We've talked about tracks, we've talked about video elements, we're kind of creating a video we're almost creating a commercial for a college at this point, which is kind of fun. We've named our tracks, which is kind of cool. One thing that I do, just as sort of an organizational thing for myself, is you can actually move your tracks around. I like to keep my music track at the bottom. So not only can you name the tracks, but if you click and drag, you can just drag this down. And I just put my music at the bottom because I know that I'm going to have to like move layers of my video sandwich up and down a bit. And the music almost never changes for me. Usually I just drop a track in and it's X amount of minutes and seconds. And so I leave that there. So I just like to push that towards the bottom. Another thing that I do is sometimes I'll end up with a lot of tracks. So right now I have 3, but if I add a 4th by right-clicking on my tracks list, insert track above. And so then if I scroll up, I've got track 4. And the music probably is hardly audible. Sorry about that. But now I have to scroll around my tracks a bit. Another organizational bit that's kind of cool is if I take my mouse right under, like right above where my play buttons are and my little timeline scrubber, I get a little up and down arrow. And if I click and hold and I just drag that up, I'm losing some real estate up top. Like, it's not affecting my video, but I get to see more of my track options. So that's something that you can do as well. And then notice too that my my canvas is a little squished. So what I might do then is I might change this to the hand and scroll wheel down a bit, and I can zoom back to get a full view of my canvas. You can also do that here as well. I can choose fit, and my canvas will then reshape itself to the amount of like visual real estate I have. And if I go back, like let's say I don't need to see all these tracks anymore, I can just slide this back down. And it's like automatically fitting for me, which is nice. So I have options to, I'm not stuck if my screen is small, which is pretty cool. A few more things that we need to know about timeline and the tracks and the layers and such. Locking, you have buttons next to your track names. You have a little eyeball, a little magnet, and a little padlock. And these are important to know. The padlock means lock, as would be implied by a padlock. That means that nothing on your track is editable. You can't damage it in any way. So if you're doing like splits or cuts, locking your track is a great way to just tell Camtasia, nope, I like this track the way it is. Do not touch it. Do not destroy it, regardless of what I do. The magnet's a little interesting. You may find yourself at in times where you have space between your videos. So for example, let's say I've got a little bit of blank space between these. And that just may be how they got dropped in. So if I reach the end of one clip, I'll hit a little bit of a blank spot there in my video, and then it'll pick back up here. More blank space back here. The magnet's kind of cool because what that does is it just brings it all together. And you can see that the magnet is on with those arrows to the right side of that magnet. And if I turn the magnet off, it leaves those videos squished together, which is kind of cool. And last but not least, I've got my eyeball. If I want to turn a track off just to see what's going on below, that turns things off and turns things back on. Probably helpful with this icon or iconography bit here. If I want to see what my video looks like without this icon, just quickly flip it off and flip it back on. Cool. So that is basically what those do. So that's kind of the overview of timelines and tracks. The next question I've got is, can you record yourself teaching content to add to a project? And the answer is yes, absolutely. At the very top here is a button that says record. If I press that, there should be something that comes up. I don't know if you can see this little thing that I'm dancing around the screen here. It says capture at the top. Over on the left, it says screen 1. I've got a little, oh, perfect. And if you're in Camtasia 2020, this looks a little different. It got updated in 2021, but most of it's the same. You get to pick which screen you want to record, generally the main screen that you're working with. You can choose your region as well if you only want just like a teeny portion. You can record your webcam as well. If I turn this on, I believe it won't work because Zoom is hijacking my camera right now. I can turn on the microphone, which of course it's being finicky now because Zoom is also hijacking my microphone. And I can choose to record system audio if the thing that I'm recording is pumping out music or sound. Once I do that, and I'm gonna give you the most pared down version, let's hit record. It'll give you a 3, 2, 1. And I can record my screen, so I'm gonna make this folder dance. I'm going to right click on my screen just for something. And then when I'm done, I hit the stop button. I only recorded 8 seconds of video, but it comes up in a new category, screen recordings. And I can just drop that on my timeline. And now all this stuff that I did is is now part of my video. If you chose to use your webcam and your microphone, that will come in as its own separate track, which is kind of cool. So you can edit your audio from your talking head. You can make it bigger or smaller. Really cool. And I used to do this for my kiddos all the time. And to answer that question, it's the big red record button in the upper left. And so this is what I would do to teach my kids in K-12. I would do grammar lessons every day. So what I would do on Sunday is I would get all my grammar lessons ready. I would record myself doing 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4 separate files, mix down the videos with my talking self. And then we would do, that would be like a thing that they would do is they'd come in, they'd sit down, they'd put their headphones on, they'd do the grammar lesson. It would give me time to take attendance, get all that beginning classroom stuff out of the way. And then we would move on to the rest of the lesson after that. But that's a great question. How do you record yourself? Big record button. Make sure your webcam and microphone are enabled. And that's how you do that. All right, cool. So that's, we've covered a lot of ground so far. We're about 30 minutes in. Let's keep going. So let's talk about more visual elements and how to manipulate this stuff. So once you record your screen, that becomes a visual element. Once you record your webcam, that becomes a visual element. These are all visual elements. And by that, I just mean things that you can see. But the real magic is the editing. I'm always a firm believer that the art is in the editing. Inserting a track is right-clicking on a track and then inserting a track at the top. So everything is either a video or an image. And that's pretty much the extent of your visual elements, which is kind of cool. Videos have set lengths. So this video here, this one where we have the drone footage of flying through college, that is 8 seconds and 2 frames long. And you can speed that up and slow that down, which we'll talk about soon. However, images have no set length. So this particular icon is, if I just hold down the mouse button at the very end, where I've got my little 2 arrows there, it'll show me what the start, where it starts and the duration being how long it is. This is a 5-second image. The cool thing about an image is there's no dynamic data, so I can stretch this out as long as I want, which is pretty awesome. So I can take this 5-second image or this 5-second icon and turn it into a 53-second icon. And that will just live over the top of my video for 53 seconds until that time runs out. Then it goes away. So images are indefinite. You choose how long and how short they are. You can choose how big and how small they are. If your mouse button is selected at the top, I can blow this up, I can scale this down, I can do whatever I want, I can position this if I want to, which is kind of cool. So that is my, that's how you work with images, is you manipulate them on the canvas, you extend their length out in the timeline, etc., etc. These are great questions. I'm going to keep these hip-pocketed towards the end, by the way, because these are fantastic. What else do we need to know about effects? There are other visual elements that you can add straight from Camtasia, which are super important, especially in the realm of instructional design. And a lot of that comes from a little menu item over here called Annotations. So if you click over to Annotations, you've got a lot of different types of annotations. And those are broken down by the buttons at the top here. Automatically, it takes you to things with words. And very immediately, you've got word bubbles. So let's say I want to drop in a word bubble. I can drop it right into my canvas, and notice down below on my timeline, it kind of happens right where your playhead is stopped. And I can manipulate that too after the fact. I can make it longer, I can make it shorter, I can change when it comes on and goes off of my timeline. One of my favorite things about word bubbles is I can actually move this around to point to someone who needs to be, quote, talking, if that's something that you want to do, which is cool. I'm not a huge fan of the word bubbles per se. Oftentimes when I need to call attention to something, I'll just drop in like a text box. And these are elements that you can drop in. So a few more. I've got word boxes. You can do arrows as well to call attention to things. And every time you drop in a visual element and it's selected, and notice every time I'm dropping in an element, it's automatically creating new tracks above where I am. So I have to keep scrolling up and scrolling down. Over on the right-hand side, I can actually manipulate what's going on with these. So this arrow doesn't do me much good because A, it's this teal color, which is kind of low contrast, and B, it's super thin. How are they going to know it's there? I can change just about anything with this arrow. I can increase the thickness, which is super cool, and I can change the color, which will help my learners better see this arrow as it pops on the screen. And just about anything and everything has some sort of element or property that you can change to fit what you need it to do. Other elements that are kind of important are shapes. You can drop in stars and circles and squares, triangles if you want to, and there's all sorts of different shapes. You can go to Camtasia to download more assets and things like this. Another one of my favorite elements is the blur feature. So if I want to, I can blur out bits of my video. And the blur function is great because it adheres to that sort of timeline track peanut butter jelly sandwich metaphor. So this blur is at the very top. If I move this down, let's see, and I move my arrow above it, I can blur everything under this arrow. Notice that the arrow on the track is above my blur. So you can really kind of go nuts and insane playing with layers and how they affect each other. But I've done stuff like this before where I will blur out a stock video and then drop like an icon on top of it or drop a text box on top of it. A really popular thing to do with this would be to blur something out and go, warning, in case you hadn't thought about this, here you go. Other things in the blur function work as you expect. Spotlighting will darken the rest of your video except that spot that you want, which is kind of nice if you need to call attention to something. Highlighting sort of works the same way. Has that little highlighter icon, I can highlight and I can change the color of my highlighter as well. And if this is simply too blue, I can scale that down a bit. Kind of fun. And another one of my absolute favorites is the Pixelator, and I can choose just how pixely I want something to be. This is kind of what they did in the 90s for nudity, which is kind of funny. But this is also a feature that's there as well. Another interesting annotation are these. I'm going to get rid of this college guy here just because he's in the way. Are these little squiggly lines here? But these are animated. I think that's kind of cool. So if I need to call attention to a very specific thing, let's say I want to call attention to this spot on my timeline, I can just drop this in here. Notice how it comes in on my timeline. If I hit play, shoop, draws a cool circle. That's kind of an informal, almost hand-drawn circle. There's the perfect circle as well if we want to go that route. Nice and clean. So if you're doing something for a corporate company, you might want the clean circles. If you're doing something for like a small tech startup, you might want the cool, like hand-drawn, hey, look, I did this with a marker. And last but not least, these very last ones are keyboard commands. So like if you need to demonstrate like some software simulations, it's like, oh, you need to press Shift V to do this command. You can drop this on your timeline as well. Position it where it needs to go. Then click over here on the properties, and then you just press the keys that you want to use. In this case, I'll go with Shift V. I'll hold down Shift and then press V, and Camtasia automatically catches up and does, it drops that command in so you can show your end user what buttons you're pressing for this software tutorial. And this is a good time to transition. So I'm going to jump into another part, talk about trimming. But because I'm in between things, I'll answer those questions that came up in the chat. If you want to add your voiceover to video, do you add it through the add track also? If you add your voice to video, you can do it one of two ways. If you go back to the record function and it pops up, if you're recording your webcam and your microphone, if you turn this on, I can't because Zoom is on, it will automatically be embedded in your webcam video. However, if you just want to narrate over existing video, you can also do voice narration. You would choose your microphone at the top and then just hit start voice recording, and it will play through your video and you would just talk over it as it's playing in real time. Or if you have a separate audio editor like Audacity or Reaper or Pro Tools or whatever audio workstation you like to use, you can record it there and then just bring it in as an audio file like we did with our music. The next question is, I know you can't expand from 720 to 1080, but can you change something from 30 frames to 60 frames? Not yet. You can always go from up to down, and that's why I always recommend starting in 1080 and exporting down if you need to. Artificial intelligence is sort of catching up where they're starting to do things like extrapolate from 30 frames to 60 frames. However, it's not something you can do efficiently yet. So the short answer is no. The long answer is, in a few years, that may change. And last but not least, also to add sound and music, does it have to be an MP3 or can it be WAV? I actually believe Camtasia prefers WAV, but MP3 is generally used because of the smaller file size. So be aware that you can use both. I think you can even use M4A, but I'm not sure. I only ever work in MP3 and WAV because I'm a Windows person. And so those are the questions that we have so far. All right, so we've gone over annotations. We've talked about text boxes, arrows, the properties over on the right that you can customize, all of these crazy annotations. My timeline's a mess, by the way. This is not what a final product looks like. The next thing that we want to talk about is trimming. Sometimes we have stuff that's just too long. Like we have too much video or too much audio or too much anything, and we need to trim it down. We've already talked about the fact that static elements like pictures are indefinite. So if I want to drop in my icon again on one of my tracks, oh no, there we go. I was like, we're slowing down. I can extend this picture as long as I want. That's not a big deal. And trimming is exactly what it looks like. I just take the ends and move them shorter or longer. Now, another thing that's kind of important though, is that videos don't necessarily behave like pictures. So let's say I go back to my cool college drone footage here. This is 8 seconds. Now, if I trim this, it'll trim off the beginning. Actually, it might be better if we do this with college kids. Uh-oh, my computer's starting to slow down. There we go. College kids. I'm gonna move my hat out of the way. Notice here we have a girl in glasses in the middle facing left, and we slowly rotate around to where she's gonna be facing right in just a second. If I trim this video, or if I take my mouse over to the very left, and I get my double arrow, my left and right, if I trim this, it'll trim off the beginning. So we'll notice that as we start crossing over into our video, that part where she's immediately facing left, we've trimmed off. Conversely, if we do the same thing on the right, we trim off the end of the video. So now we just have this video where she's just facing the middle. Another option in terms of trimming, I'm going to delete some of these from my timeline to help my computer think less. I'm just clicking these and pressing delete, by the way, for those playing at home. You can remove elements that way very quickly. If I try and trim my video, and if I trim it off the end, it's never gone, which is kind of cool, so I can always get it back. It's just telling Camtasia which part of the video I need it to play. However, if I try and reveal the video that I've trimmed off, I can only go as long as the length of the video. So this video is 17 seconds long. It ends here. If I scale it down, if I scale it down a bit to 12, that's great. That's how long the video is now in my timeline, but I can always get it back. However, I can't extend beyond the total length of the video simply because we didn't shoot anymore. Now, another thing you can do is sometimes trimming like this can take a while. Maybe I know that I only need this middle part. I can use this button right here. This is the split function. So if I press this while this is selected, and you can tell it's selected because it's got that little yellow border around it, I now have two different videos. And I can move them around as I see fit. So play here, blank space, and then pick back up where I've split. And so split, going back to the sandwich metaphor, I've simply cut the sandwich in half. I don't have any less sandwich, but now I have two independent pieces of sandwich that I can move around, which is kind of nice. Control Z is your friend. Control Z is the undo function, or if you go up to edit and undo, you can undo things that you just did. So if I accidentally moved something around or split something at the wrong spot, I can move backwards and rejoin those things together. And I use that quite a bit. In fact, the hotkey that I use, I'm really big on hotkeys. I'll usually find the place where I need to start this video, maybe right here, click it to select, and I'll hit the S key for split. And then oftentimes when I split, I know that I only need this last part of the video. And so I'll just click this very first part, hit delete, and now I'm left with what I want. So splitting is something that you'll be doing quite a bit over the course of your time with Camtasia. Lots of things come in, especially too with this audio. There's a lot of intro in this audio, and you may not be able to hear it as well as I do. It comes in now. And then, boom, that's where the energy ramps up, right? So what I'll do is maybe I'll select this, move it right to where I know the energy starts, hit that S key to split it off, and just delete that front bit. You'll do that quite a bit in your time. Cuts it into 2 parts. And the cool thing is let's say I've made a mistake. Oh no, maybe this client really wanted that buildup. Even though I've split the video and gotten rid of that first part, no worries. Use that mouse trick, bring it to the front end of your element, get those double arrows there, click and hold, and I can drag out that part that I cut off. So it's never gone, it's just telling Camtasia which bits you need to use. So hopefully that helps. All right. Let's see, I've got a lot of stuff. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm gonna try and prioritize the stuff that we need. One really great thing about video is you can think of videos as lots of images, right? You know, videos used to be called moving pictures. It's because it's a lot of pictures being played sequentially, and it plays the trick on our brain that we're actually watching something moving. So in our particular project, we have 30 frames in the span of 1 second, and that creates a video effect for us. However, we talked earlier that I can't expand this beyond what the video is because there's no additional footage shot. However, if I do want to freeze frame on a video, I can do that. If you take your mouse and you hold down your Alt key, so on your keyboard, it should be the one directly next to your spacebar, Alt, Alt, holding down Alt, and I move my mouse next to the edge of that clip. Remember how before it used to be that left and right arrow? Now I've got like a little square with an arrow in it. That's prompting me because I'm holding down the Alt key to extend this frame out. And then we treat that very last frame like an image. So I can click and drag this out as far as I want to go. So if that video ends, but I really want to hold it out, I think on Mac it might be Command, I believe. So she's doing her thing, showing her friend stuff on the computer, and then, boom, freeze frame. I can hold that out as long as I need to hold it out, which is awesome. You might not find that you're doing this at the end of clips so much, but probably more in the middle. I'm going to Control Z to undo, bring it back to how it was. And so that's where we use something we've previously learned. So let's say we're going through, and I want to freeze frame right there. Like maybe I want to highlight the fact that she's pointing to the computer. I can split that clip, move this half out a bit, give it some room to breathe. Come on, computer. Uh-oh, I accidentally dragged it up. Move this clip out, and I can run that trick here. Hold down the Alt key, extend the frame on this clip, bring it up, and then bump it up against the clip. Notice it kind of snaps in place, which is nice. Let's see how that looks. Oop, sorry, computer's trying to catch up. Doing her thing, and then, boom, points. Hold out on that frame. And then once we cross that threshold again, picks up like nothing happened. Really handy feature if you need to like showcase something in the middle of a tutorial, like, oh, hey, look at this. This is what we need to do. That's a feature I use a lot. So that is the extend frame feature. Another cool thing that you can do with extend frame, if you have a particular frame of your video that's kind of important that you need to extend out, but the alt frame is not quite working for you in terms of what you need functionality-wise. Camtasia 2021 just added this button to the timeline. It's called Add Exported Frame. If I find the frame that I need to showcase from a video, I just press this button. And whatever's on my timeline, so if it's if it's my screen with the keyboard and the arrows and such, whatever's happening on my canvas at that very moment, I can hit Export Frame. And it will drop a static image of whatever happened into my timeline. If you're using something older than Camtasia 2021, it's just up in your export tab, you can export the frame. It just used to be kind of a pain in the butt because you'd have to export the frame to an image and then go re-import it into Camtasia. It's a feature that's been used a lot, so they just added a button to the 2021 version. But you can export whatever's going on in your timeline as a still image if that's something that you find yourself needing. Okay, and so one thing that I was gonna do, I was gonna go into ripple moves, but the last thing that you're really gonna want, because we're coming up on our hour, is an animation. So I'm gonna clean up my timeline a little bit. One cool feature about Camtasia is over on your tracks, notice that I've started deleting all sorts of things from my timeline. However, I'm still left with all of these tracks that I don't want anymore. If I right click on the track, any track, pick a card, any card, pick a track, any track, right click on it, remove all empty tracks, and it will just get rid of whatever you're not using, which is pretty cool. So now I'm back down to 2 tracks. The very last thing that I want to talk about is something called animations. I'll get rid of my video here. The question came up, is the only way to make an element completely gone is to delete it? Yes, so I'm just going to delete videos off of my timeline, and they're not deleted. They're still in my media bin, so I can still bring them back in, but the only way to get it off of my timeline is to just straight up delete it. So yes, that is the answer. I'll bring video 1 back in, even though I've deleted it before. Another thing that you'll use quite a bit is something called animations. And over on the left-hand side, it's its own category. It'll default to zoom and pan, which I never use. I always jump right over to animations straight away. And we've got a lot of animations here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I only ever use 1. And I'll show you why. Scaling down, scaling up. If you mouse over these things, you'll see what you'll get a preview of what these animations do. Scale to fit, scale up, etc., etc. I always use the custom animation, and this is why. What you'll do is you'll take your custom animation and you'll drag it into the clip or the image or whatever visual element you want. Drag it on, and it creates these little arrows, or it creates one arrow with these 2 dots at the end. And I can drag these dots out on either side, and this kind of dictates when my animation starts and stops, and I can even move the arrow itself. Now let's get into the verbiage here. These 2 dots at the end are called keyframes, and all a custom animation does is you take the starting keyframe, which is your beginning point, it's what your video is now, and then you'll click the end keyframe and manipulate your video in some way, and that's how the video will end. And this arrow in between will take care of the rest for you. To show you what I mean, nothing has changed. This keyframe is exactly like this keyframe because I haven't made any changes yet. So let's make a change. I'm going to click this ending keyframe here. And over on the right-hand side, I've got my properties of my video. I'm going to go ahead and scale this down. Let's see, I can slide this up, I can slide it down, I can put my cursor in here and just use the arrow keys if I want to and scale it down. So I'm just going to scale this down quite a bit. I'm shrinking the video per se. So if I click back over to my first keyframe, it's the normal size. If I click over to the last keyframe, I've scaled it down. That's an abrupt change. However, this custom animation takes care of that for me. Watch and see. Normal size, first keyframe, boom, animation starts, and it's going through and animating to the desired result. That is the animation that I exclusively use. I always custom animate. So basically I have a starting position, an ending position, or a desired outcome, and that animation takes care of the rest. And to do that, you just have to click on that end point or the beginning point, whichever one needs changing, make the change, and Camtasia takes care of the rest. And we can go back and make these changes after the fact too. So let's say not only did I want it to shrink, maybe I want it to be a little more transparent. Drop the opacity down to 30. It takes care of that too. Essentially, it takes a starting set of properties and an ending set of properties and fills in the blanks. And if I want that to happen at a different point in the timeline, I just drag this arrow around. So maybe I don't want that to happen right in the middle. I want it to happen a little more towards the beginning. That's fine too. I took my starting point, my ending conditions, and instead of, redoing the animation, I just moved it around. Another really important thing, if you want it to happen a little faster, and notice too as I drag this arrow around, you can actually see the animations as I scrub through them, which is really handy. If I want this to happen a little faster, all I've got to do is just drag one of these keyframes closer to the other. Shoop! Much faster. Now I did technically fib. That's the animation I use 99% of the time. However, if I need to bring it back to where it was before, the only other animation I use is called restore. Basically what that does is it takes your last animation and flips it around. So in this first animation, we scrub through, we shrink it down, we make it opaque or less opaque, and then the restore animation will undo what I just did. It's like the Control-Z of animations, but it's right in your timeline. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. Shrink down, make it transparent, scale back up, and then make the opacity what it was before. It basically just returns it to its original condition. And so that's a lot of what you're going to do in Camtasia. There are other things that we get a little more involved with. We do transitions, we do clip speeds. And the last thing that I do want to show you, just so you have some sort of viable product, is how to export your video and actually make it usable. So this video is a mess. What I'll do is let's trim it down just a bit more. So what'll happen is it'll go to the very end of your elements. So if I exported this video right now, it would play 17 seconds of these college kids and then be a black screen and play out this audio until the very, very end, which is 2 minutes and 39 seconds. To make a more viable product, I might trim this down a bit. I can take this audio and trim it all the way back just by dragging it in. I also have the option of selecting this audio clip. And by the way, this little slider is very handy to zoom in on your timeline. I might go here, and I might hit the S key or this button here to split, and then delete the end of this video. So now I have a video that's only 17 seconds long. And if you're ever unaware of how long your video is going to be, right here will give you your total time. So if I bring in that music track again, just Control-Z to undo. I think my computer's catching up mentally. There we go. I now have a 2 minute and 38 second long video because that music track's really long. But if I get rid of that, split, delete, I have a 17-second video. So the very last thing that I want to do is, let's say I want to export this cool 17-second long video. Up at the very top, I have this export button. You can also go to the export tab on the upper left. And you have a variety of options as to how you want to export. I always use the screen button here. I don't really mess around over there. I can export to screencast.com if I have a paid subscription there. If you want to export directly to Nomia, you can. If you're a higher ed institution, you may have this already. TechSmith Video Review is another thing that you probably have to pay for. You can export to Vimeo and YouTube and Google Drive. And you also have custom production settings as well once you get a little more advanced. Oftentimes what I do is I'll just generally export it to a file on my computer, and then I'll upload it wherever it needs to go. So I just often choose local file. And I have a lot of options. Very similar options to what I had before. MP4 only is just only the video. So MP4, 480, 720, 1080. This is why what I talked about earlier is why you want to start in 1080, because I can export to 480 if I need to. Smart Player is if you've created an interactive video, and in more advanced lessons we can talk about how to create interactive video where you can add hotspots and quiz questions and such, but when you export that, you have to export that with a Smart Player and then host it on the web somewhere, kind of advanced stuff. Custom production settings, if you need to export in like 4K or need higher audio fidelity, that kind of stuff. But for the sake of just getting a video done, MP4 only is where you will spend a lot of your time. So in this case, we have a 1080p video, but we don't want to take up a lot of space. So let's downsample it to 720. I'm going to click MP4 up to 720 if you're playing along at home. I'm going to go through and click Next. And it's going to ask me where I want to save it. What's it called? So let's call it College Kids. Gosh, I'm so old now. It didn't seem like that long ago that I was in college. Anyway, I'm going to put this on my desktop. If you need to put it somewhere else, just click that folder. Boop, boop, boop. I'm choosing desktop. You can put it wherever you want it to go. You can organize these into subfolders if you want. If you export it with a Smart Player, it's going to come with all sorts of like HTML things and other additional files, so you may want to package those into a separate folder, which will get created for you. For me, if I'm just exporting a video, it's the one file, so I just uncheck that. Show production results means it opens it for you after the fact. That's up to you. I usually just like to go and find it. And same thing with play video after production. Hit question in the chat. Any difference between business and education in terms of features? No, the only difference is price, which is awesome. They cut you a break if you work for an educational institution. So I'm going to hit finish, and that's going to export. And while that's exporting to my desktop, someone's asking me about my audio quality. This is called a Blue Snowball microphone. This is about $50. Its older brother is the Yeti, which is about 100 and some change. So that's, pick your poison if you want. And just whatever generic Amazon ARM thing that screws onto your desk. Cool, so I exported my video in 720 to my desktop. Here it is, it's called collegekids.mp4. Let's double click to open. Ta-da, and so that's how you create your first video. And so just to recap what we've learned before we just kind of open the floor to Q&A, we've learned about Camtasia, what it looks like. We've learned to always check our project settings, and if you bring in a new video or if you bring in a video for the first time, double check to make sure that your project settings haven't changed to conform to that video. We've learned about what the timeline is and that video editing is linear and it's hours, minutes, seconds, frames. We've learned about layers, and so things that are on top of other things will kind of take precedent in the visual hierarchy. So if something's underneath something else and you think, why can't I see this? Well, it's probably hiding under something else. We've talked about visual elements, so if you need to drop things onto your timeline, you can make annotations, call out things with text boxes, use arrows, drop in different shapes. And those are all editable over on your right-hand side with properties, changing colors, fonts, size, thickness of those particular elements. You can blur things out, you can pixelate them, you can highlight, you can call attention. You have shapes that draw, and you can do keystrokes as annotations as well. We've learned how to trim because our videos are oftentimes always going to be too long, and oftentimes our images are always going to be too short. So we can trim things off the front and the back of videos as well. We can split them in two and separate them. We can extend frames on videos as well. And probably the most important thing that you're going to be using over and over and over and over again are animations. And we know that the custom animation is the paramount one that you're going to use. And that is about as much as we can cover to get started. Oh, and exporting. We use the green export button, oftentimes to a local file, and oftentimes MP4 only until you get advanced and start making interactive videos. But this is a great... Oh, and last thing too, I forgot all the things that we've learned today. The record button in the upper left will allow you to record your head, your mic, your webcam, your mic, your screen, and then bring that all into Camtasia to then do all the Camtasia magic that you want to do. And that is a lot for an hour. So I think this is pretty good. Success. We had 80 register. We had about 30 show up. I'll record this. This is recorded, so I'll probably put this unlisted somewhere, so don't worry about, your face being in it or anything. So I'll stop that recording right now in case you want to open up your cam and or microphone to ask.